Hi, everyone. Congrats on today's achievement, and thanks, Ryan, for yet another opportunity here to sharpen my skills. So, my goal for today is to do three things. So, the first thing is to let you know about an app that I think might be useful to you sometime in the future. Number two, to talk a little bit about how it came together. And maybe number three, if we have a bit of time at the end, to introduce you to some of the technical features that I think make it quite engaging. So, first, let me come here and open it up. So this is an app called Lambda Cards, and it's an app that I built at the end of Unit 4 to study for the web core interview. And to give everybody a bit of context who may not be familiar with the Lambda curriculum here, we have 4 core units of study on the web program that are all about getting familiar and getting good at the core technologies in web development today. And then there's a 5th unit that's all about computer science, kind of learning and then executing algorithms. And ultimately, we go to the 6th unit, which is what we just came from, which is all about building and actually implementing all of those skills. And so the web core interview happens at the end of the 4th unit, and it's sort of the threshold test for us to go from those core technologies into kind of the final stage of Lambda School, and really sort of prepare ourselves for kind of what's ahead and ultimately getting a job. And so as I was thinking about preparing for this interview, the first thing that came to mind is, well, maybe I'll just write some flashcards. It's something that's worked for me in the past for similar things where you need to sort of not only understand these topics, but be really sharp and on your feet in terms of the conceptual recall of it. And so as I was sitting down to write these flashcards, I thought, well, wait a minute, I've just spent all this time learning these technologies. Why don't I get some reps using them by implementing these flashcards as a web application? And in so doing, maybe I can actually help some other people as well who are preparing for this thing. And so that's what I did. And so the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is the design process. And so before I actually sat down to code anything, one of the things I really like to do is I like to define what it is I'm working on, define the scope, maybe think and brainstorm a little bit about the features, and then ultimately build a roadmap for myself so that I can, once I sit down to coding and to building, focus on the building process, not on architecting and figuring out where I'm going next. So the first thing I did is I wrote the summary. And what you can see here on the top is basically a brief description of what I thought I was going to build, which was a flashcards web application for the web core interview. The flashcards should pop on the screen. It should have a question in the front, should have a button so that you can flip it and see the answer in the back. And all of that should sort of, work seamlessly with the flashcard deck. And so what I did is I sort of wrote out the basic features that I wanted to implement on first launch. And then as I was brainstorming those, I also came up with some future features that I might implement down the line. Some of those have actually gone ahead and implemented since then. So the next step after that summary was to sort of architect what the blueprint was going to look like from a user's perspective. So I call these my flow charts. And what I do is I sort of sit down and I say, okay, I'm a user. I'm landing on this homepage. What is on the homepage? And then where do I go from that homepage, and so on and so forth. And what this allows me to do is I can then carry this blueprint with me into the build phase and then focus on coding rather than trying to figure out where I'm going next. So it really sort of reduces the cognitive load of the build process and makes everything way more efficient and less likely to have bugs. The rest of this document is a combination of designing data objects and designing, critical pieces of the design process, but then also some engineering specs. So with that, why don't we go back here to the app and I can actually demo it for you guys. So you land on the home page, you click Start Studying. The application retrieves all of the 48 flashcards from the database. It shuffles them, and it displays the first one to the user. And so in this case, the one we got was why use client-side routing. And so you can imagine if you're a student and you're sitting there, this is the first time you're going through it, you don't quite recall what client-side routing is, but you kind of have some inkling. You think about it. Maybe you spend 30 seconds thinking about this, and eventually you say, okay, I'm ready to see the answer. You flip it over, you have the answer. So now you can compare what you came up with on your own to what is the documented answer for this topic, and so on and so forth. So you can keep doing this for all 48 of the cards. If you ever get to a question that maybe you already know and don't want to spend the time thinking through this because you're confident in it, you can just skip it. You can skip as many as you want. When you get to the next one that you actually want to do, you think about it, you come up with your answer, then you flip it, you see the documented answer. So that's sort of the flashcard app. That's that's the functionality in a nutshell. So since we have a little bit more time, what I might do next is maybe talk a little bit about how this works, this typewriter effect, and maybe to put it into perspective, good artists copy, great artists steal. And so I stole this from this pipe.com fintech company that implemented it on their homepage. And I sort of saw that a few months ago, and I had sort of stored it and thought, hey, maybe I'll do that at some point. So I did. The first thing I did for that is I tried to write it myself. And if you can think in JavaScript mode for a minute, you can sort of envision how you might do this with spans and maybe get element by ID and slicing and sort of implementing some sort of loop for this thing to type and then delete and then type the next one and so on. The tricky part, though, the non-trivial part of this concept is how to make it loop indefinitely so that as a user, if you're sitting here on the homepage, it never stops. It just keeps going, and it sort of goes from the first word to the second to the third, and then goes back to the first word. And that's where I spent a lot of time. And ultimately, what I decided to do is I figured there must be a module out there or a library that has already solved this problem. So let me go research that. And in fact, I found a couple of them. And the one I decided on was one that is really clean, simple, and widely documented. And so let me show that to you. It's called typewriter-effect. So we can look here at package.json. Here's typewriter-effect. First thing I did is npm install it. And then I'll show you kind of how simple it is to implement this. So we go here to the home page. We've got the H1 that we saw in there. We've got the tag. And then we've got these 3 strings that we saw typewriting back and forth. And so what you do is you import the typewriter component from typewriter-effect. You actually render the component as part of the home page. And then you introduce the options that you want to do. And so in this case, I have the 3 strings that I wanted to show in typewrite. I've got auto start, which means set to true, which means that as soon as the component renders, it'll start typewriting. And I've got the loop set to true, which is as soon as it's done with the first pass, it starts on another pass. And so it's kind of like exactly what I needed it to do. So with that, why don't I pause there and thank you guys again for having me here and see if there's any questions.